Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Meet the Candidate. I'll be your host today, and I'm Vernon Garrison. Today, we'll be interviewing Congressman Dan Bishop, a Republican congressman running for Attorney General here in North Carolina. Well, I'd like to remind you guys that Election Day is November the 5th, and also early voting starts October the 17th through November the 2nd. So, let's go right into Meet the Candidate with Congressman Dan Bishop, Republican congressman running for Attorney General. Okay, Congressman Bishop, can you tell us a little bit about your legal background and your experience as both a candidate and your professional career?
Be glad to, Vernon, and thank you for the opportunity to do this. I appreciate your serving as the interviewer. And I'm serving in Congress now, as you said. I was elected in 2019 in a special election. You all are broadcasting this obviously in the Greenville area, and one of your congressmen here in this area is Greg Murphy. And Greg and I were both elected at the same time, not in the regular election sequence, but in a special election. Walter Jones had passed away. That was Greg's reason for running then, and there had been a sort of a fouled up 2018 congressional race. But I stepped in that special election, was elected to Congress. Before that, was elected twice to the state Senate. Before that, once to the state House. And then several years earlier had served as a county commissioner in Mecklenburg County, where I have lived most of my life. That's kind of the political background, or background of public service. But I also, the main part of my life's work has been spending 29 years as a lawyer serving clients in business disputes, litigating in the courts, the state and federal courts of North Carolina, the trial courts, and the appellate courts, including in the North Carolina Supreme Court. So I've had a good bit of experience as an attorney, and in a way, all these things come together, and I think have prepared me perfectly well for what I'm doing now, which is running for Attorney General of North Carolina.
Okay. So can you tell us why you're leaving Congress to run?
That's a good question, because it appears, now we haven't researched it that I can vow as a historical fact, but at least in terms of just common parlance, no one's ever actually left the United States House of Representatives to run for a state Attorney General office. Now, many have left to run for a United States Senate seat, some have left to run for governor in their home state, but not Attorney General. But it turns out that we have two congressmen in this race. A freshman congressman is my opponent, and again, I've served for 5 years in Congress. And I think it's testament to the significance of the state Attorney's General office in our current political situation. And I think that comes from the fact that we've sort of had a Congress that is in deadlock for a long time. The American public is closely divided as a matter of politics, sort of polarized. And Congress has been unable to move the ball much and really make law in one direction. And so as things have kind of stagnated there, you've seen to a greater and greater degree presidents and administrative agencies try to make law through rulemaking, establishing rules or sending out guidance and attempting to affect the law that way. And so you've seen, in response to that, in many cases, state attorneys general across the country have engaged in really consequential litigation to defeat rules that exceeds administrative agencies' powers under law. And so that's one significant reason. But also in North Carolina, the Attorney General's office is extremely potent. It has a great deal of authority. People kind of sort of forget about it from time to time. It's the top law enforcement officer in the state, but it's not a prosecutor's office primarily. The prosecutors are the district attorneys under our constitutional system. But the Attorney General is the top law enforcement officer, has a great deal of civil litigation that he's responsible for, has to enforce a number of types of corporations who are engaged in deceptive schemes to the public. The Attorney General is responsible for dealing with that. When there's businesses that engage in antitrust behavior, have to respond to that. So there's a host of responsibilities in the Attorney General's office. And he also has an extremely important role coordinating, supporting, and leading the criminal justice infrastructure. And That is that's the main reason, the top reason that I'm seeking to become Attorney General. We've seen crime at 10-year highs on a sustained basis, a lot of increase in violent crime across the country, and some have hastened to say that you've seen it tick back and it's dropped a little bit here or there this quarter or that quarter. But in fact, we're consistently living that. And so that is, I think, and I'm much more to say in the course of the interview perhaps, but that's the main reason I'm seeking to be Attorney General.
Let me put you on the spot just a little bit, and I thank you for outlining what you feel like the role of the Attorney General is. Congressman Dan Bishop, you've explained that, and you're starting to share with us your motive, but what makes you qualified, and why do you even want to be an Attorney General?
Well, I think it's the combination, as I've suggested when I laid out my legal experience and my experience in public service. The combination of experiences, I think, ideally suit me to serve in that position in a way that can penetrate and get the job done. I know what that office, in many circumstances, involved in complicated litigation in court of varying kinds. I've done that at all levels of the court system for a long time. I did it for, as I said, 29 years in a legal career of that very type. And then on the other side, by virtue of serving at local government, state government, in the legislature, and in the Congress, I've developed relationships and had experiences that attune me to the way to get things done. So, for example, relationships in the North Carolina legislature, by virtue of having served in both the House and Senate, there are things that need to be adjusted in the criminal justice system and legal matters that the state is involved in, and having the relationships with legislators when they need to make policy changes to advocate on behalf of a system, to focus tightly with and collaborate tightly with the district attorneys who overwhelmingly, by the way, endorse my campaign in this race, and coordinate with each county sheriff across 100 counties. By far the majority of them also endorse my candidacy in this race. I think I've been prepared through these experiences in a way that I can serve North Carolinians effectively in that job and restore law and order.
Crime is at an all-time high in many places across the state and county. What would your plan be as Attorney General to help lower crime in North Carolina?
Yeah, and it is, and so was making reference to that a moment ago, and so let me just lay out a little more detail about it, because you do, and people, I think they experience it. If you look at polling data, or you just go talk to people these days, folks are frightened of crime. They're fearful for their personal safety. They recognize there's just this a series of lurid headlines that you see all the time. And these things haven't occurred, I think, by accident. They have been the product of bad policy, and a significant portion of it came from what I would submit was the most unwise policy idea ever to be floated in American politics about defunding police. And you've seen a series of innovations in the law, like prosecutors. There's some people call them Soros prosecutors, but prosecutors who serve in many urban areas, and they, instead of just having a neutral, unpolitical application of law, if somebody commits a crime, they're brought, they're investigated by law enforcement and then prosecuted and given, and justice is blind. I mean, that's been the honored tradition of the nation, or at least the concept that we always have pursued. There's sort of this idea about compensating and turning and for not prosecuting whole categories of crime, and that's, the evidence is in. I mean, the result has been an expansion of murders and other violent crimes, especially among communities that is allegedly designed to serve. And so you also see an environment where law enforcement officers have often been sort of made the bad guy, and there are bad people in every line of work, and certainly to include law enforcement, but by and large, that is the system of policing, and respect for law enforcement across our political spectrum has always been the kind of the historical essence of how we maintain order and allow people to flourish. And it is my view that that needs to be restored. And I think the best position from which to lead that effort in North Carolina is the Attorney General's office.
Okay. Well, we do have a few minutes left, but I want the audience to get a crystal clear comparison from your point of view between you and your opponent.
Yeah. So there is a dramatic contrast. The first area is in the experience that I've already described. So my opponent is a very well-spoken person, but he's had very little legal experience. We compared earlier on. If you go, there are state databases that you can go to. Anybody can do this search on the internet. My career appearances in the state and federal trial courts in North Carolina are 400 and, well, excuse me, actually trial courts and appellate courts total 403. So I've been in a lot of cases over the course of those almost 30 years. My opponent's been in 5. So now he served a little time as a prosecutor, just a couple of years as an assistant district attorney, but it's a dramatic difference in terms of our legal exposure and experience, especially for the nature of stuff that the Attorney General's office handles. The other striking contrast is I am about restoring law and order, and he's the opposite. He marched with defund the police protesters. He has resisted every effort to toughen up on crime. The General Assembly passed, for example, a law to make it a felony to assault a police officer during a riot. He voted no. He's persistently voted against those approaches, and he has supported a lot of the ideas that would diminish and delegitimize police as opposed to standing behind the law enforcement system. So there's a fairly dramatic contrast, and we'd be very different occupants of the Attorney General's office.
Okay. Recently, we had both conventions. Do you think that the conventions were powerful enough to help people make decisions to vote?
The national conventions are always interesting, and they certainly have been this year. I mean, I think I would say more broadly, and speaking of that, and I connecting it back to something I said earlier in the interview, I think we're in a period of kind of an interesting political realignment in America. That is to say, I think the two major parties, in terms of exactly what they represent, it's becoming, it is a changing picture. And so you see some very odd things. I mean, Donald Trump as a phenomenon is unusual in American political history, and we've never had the situation in which you have a president who is apparently on the path to being the candidate for re-election, and then for however you see it, decides to step aside, and the person who comes in is the one who's been the vice president but has never received primary votes and the like and so forth. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty in the system, and I don't know that the political conventions answer it all. There were interesting things about both of them, but ultimately I think people are probably going to decide for president based on who they thought made them better off during the time they've been in office. Now, Vice President Harris has not been president but vice president, but she's in the current administration. If people believe they're better off as a consequence of that, I imagine they'll end up supporting her. Contrarily, if they believe that before COVID came in, Donald Trump's administration was delivering economic growth and low inflation, a lot of very low unemployment across all categories of American life, they might support President Trump. That happens to be where I am, obviously, but I think it's going to be a fascinating election. I do think in North Carolina, President Trump's got a great chance of winning, and I think that'll also help those of us who are law and order candidates and back law enforcement down the ballot.
When it comes to your report card for North Carolina and how we manage our polls, the voting, how would you grade us when it comes to the voter registration process. How would you grade us? Because you're a fan.
Election integrity is a big issue, and I think that's what you're getting at. And the answer is pretty good, probably a B+. There have been issues though, and to a point that I made, I talked a lot about criminal justice and law and order, following law. But there's those parts outside criminal justice, and this is one where the Attorney General's responsibility is to revere and enforce and follow all of the law, not some law based on what the Attorney General likes ideologically or politically, but all of it. And one of the things we've seen actually is our incumbent Attorney General actually helped partisan plaintiffs dislodge some of the rules for running the election that our legislature enacted in 2020. Some of it was, there's a lot of wrestling over that in court, and when a court stopped some of it, but some of it, occurred, and changed, for example, the deadline for returning absentee ballots went from 3 days out after the election to 9 days, and so people don't really know what the outcome of the election is for over a week. That's not the way the Attorney General of North Carolina is supposed to operate, in my view. The Attorney General, and I don't even know if it's a question of my view, it's what the state constitutional system is. The Attorney General is the state's lawyer, and is obliged and it's duty bound impartially and without political bias to follow the law. The law is not made by the Attorney General, the law is made by our legislature.
One of the things I admire about the office of the Attorney General is, if I can speak to the lay people out here, is that office protects the seniors. If people go to
like scams and
scams,
yes,
after a storm, they overcharge, they gouge. What's your take on that?
Yep.
So that we can know that you'll be doing the same or even greater.
So consumer protection is sort of the area of the division of the Department of Justice that's responsible for all that. And that department, by the way, the Attorney General oversees 838 employees. So consumer protection is an important part of it. And it is a historic mission. I will say, it's another contrast between me and my opponent. One of my most significant victories in my litigation career was the application of a consumer protection statute where someone had been abused by an insurance company after a home had been destroyed by fire. And my opponents just never handled that at all. And both at the trial level and the appellate level, 51 times in the North Carolina Court of Appeals, 22 times in the North Carolina Supreme Court. You have to have the experience with that to understand what the ways are it can operate, but that needs to be a robust part of what the Attorney General does, for sure.
Thank you for following me. The second admiration I have for that office, and you've talked about it earlier, is being a top law enforcement officer. In the same way or another way, could you emphasize on your relationship that you would be looking forward to having with the chiefs of police, the sheriffs, and the like here in North Carolina?
I appreciate the question because it's an opportunity to elaborate in a way that I think, I hope it will make sense to folks. As the top law enforcement officer, there's a responsibility there. You have to project confidence and well, that's the best word I can think of. You have to project confidence in the law enforcement system. If you have these folks, and we all know that whether it's your sheriff, local sheriff where you live, or you see if you're in an urban area and you see the cops on the street, maintaining order is a pretty delicate affair. And if it becomes clear that police officers are intimidated, or they are, or they've given up, the bad guys do take advantage of that opportunity, and innocent people are victimized in the process. That doesn't mean that you don't have police officers who step across a line, or bad guys that are somewhere out, in some law enforcement agency in North Carolina that do something wrong from time to time. And those people have to be held accountable when that occurs. But it's really important at the very top for the top law enforcement officer to let everyone know that our system is basically quite good, and that the people who put themselves on the line every day to protect and serve and take the risk of being injured or killed in that process must be respected, and that there must be a systemic respect. And what you find out if you go talk to district, seriously, I've been sort of surprised to find out how extensive. If you talk to the district attorneys, and I have, almost all of them, and sheriffs, and by far the majority, or 100 of them, I don't know if I've talked to, but way over half, there's a complete disconnect from the Attorney General and those agents, those agencies. That can't be. The most important, you also can't do much in life or in any political office, and certainly not an office like the Attorney General, by yourself, or even with the staff that you have in your department. It's got to be a constant collaboration across the system. And you need to be going up to see the Western sheriffs and being at their meeting and hearing what they have to say. And frankly, I'm doing a lot of talking because this is an interview for the campaign, but listening more than you talk. I'm going to bring a new chapter to North Carolina in terms of collaboration across the criminal justice infrastructure when I'm the Attorney General. Mm-hmm. And we'll make that system operate better so that people feel safe and their families are safe. How many folks have you encountered who have been victims of crime, or they know someone who's been victim of crime, and they see this revolving door? In Charlotte, on April 29, 4 law enforcement officers were killed, 8 of them shot, all at one time, in one incident, by a perpetrator who also lost his life in that incident, who had multiple charges of felon with a gun. So he had a record, he was a felon, and then he had been charged multiple times by being arrested and being in possession of a gun, which is unlawful for a felon. On top of that, he had eluded police, so he had run from police multiple occasions, had multiple charges for that. And he had multiple charges for absconding, meaning he didn't show up when his court date was set. That person, when the Fugitive Apprehension Task Force of the United States Marshals Service, with including local officers and officers from the probation service in North Carolina, went to get this guy, he gunned them down.
Wow.
And people see things like that where folks who should not be on the street are. And I would submit that it is a failure of the criminal justice system that doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is not inevitable, and it is not the product of circumstance. It is the product of unwise decisions in terms of criminal justice policy, and a process which has caused police to be less, to be a little more standoffish and a little bit intimidated because they're fearful of being thrown under the bus.
Tough question, and I won't throw you under the bus. You have a right to keep me from throwing you under the bus.
I like tough questions.
Citizens protecting themselves. Your point of view on rights to bear arms. If you could give us a short.
I will, and I'm happy to. And I am a firm defender of, frankly, all of our constitutional rights. If they want to call me an extremist, I'm also an extremist in protection of the First Amendment right to free speech. But the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, is the right that secures all rights. Ultimately, and especially when we're in an era in which the criminal justice system is challenged to produce the result that people need. That is to say, because of some of the things I've described and some of the things I hope to correct, a lot of folks are not convinced that the criminal justice system has been adequate to protect. They feel like that the protections are all in favor of the criminals and few in favor of victims and citizens. Those folks are entitled to protect their lives and families' lives, and that's what the right to keep and bear arms is all about. I've been a strong defender of it in Congress, where some wish to attack it. A lot of people are hostile to the idea of the Second Amendment. They want folks to depend on law enforcement entirely, but it is a fundamental aspect of the freedom of Americans that came straight from, and it wasn't about protecting the ability to hunt, by the way, or to have recreational use of firearms. It was about the ability to provide self-defense and family defense against an overreaching government in its essence, but obviously to protect yourself against crime.
Give me 30 seconds on the use of AR-15s. for the issues of them.
Yeah, that perp in Charlotte had an AR-15 when he gunned down those cops. But I will tell you, what the Supreme Court has said about the Second Amendment is weapons that are in common use and possessed widely by the people are constitutionally protected under the Second Amendment right to keep and bear them. Modern sporting rifles, as some call them, are, there's tens of millions in circulation in the United States. That issue is now being pursued by some folks to being litigated in the United States Supreme Court, and I think we might have an answer from the court within a couple of years. They are quite common. The folks who call them assault weapons and say they're weapons of war and therefore they should be banned, they've done that before, by the way. Did it under the Clinton administration. They had a quote quote weapons ban that lasted for a decade and then was not renewed. Statistically, all the evidence indicated it didn't change the risk of being killed or injured by in violent crime. And so I think the answer is that just like whether it's a semi-automatic handgun, some people want to eliminate 9mm, Glock handguns, which are the most common probably out there now, and they have very unexpert ideas about what weaponry was appropriate. But so my view is that modern sporting rifles are widespread and they're protected by the Constitution.
Well, I think the American North Carolina public wants to know that you're going to keep our schools safe and keep law enforcement safe as they perform their duties and other first responding agencies. We've had an intense interview. Whew. If this is a point of humor, maybe we can laugh. You're pouring your heart out in this election. I can feel the energy. Will you gladly accept the results of this election once it's chosen by the people?
I certainly will. And look, and so you're getting at the charges and counter charges that go back. Folks who say that folks won't accept outcomes of elections, seems like sometimes we're not getting to the heart of the question, which is people are concerned about that other issue that you raised, which is, has the election been conducted fairly? I don't have. By the way, there are people who are mischievous and would like to cheat in elections. It does happen. And sometimes if you think people won't cheat in a bodacious and large scale way, you haven't lived very long. People will if they can. So we have to continually be vigilant against those things. But absolutely, our system is the best in the world. This nation is the most successful and and creates the best conditions for the flourishing of human beings in the history of the world because of the way we conduct our elections. And yeah, absolutely, I'm going to put everything into this campaign and am for Attorney General. I'm sort of unusual as a politician. I'm pretty plain spoken. I say exactly what I think, and I intend to not shape shift and be everything to everybody. I want to be straightforward. And if a voter decides that the voter wants to elect from that, the voter's making that choice. It's a sign of respect, in my view, to voters to be clear and let them decide.
Wow, great answer with 1:55 left on the clock. Is there anything else that you would like the voter to either know about you or this race? Leave me about 15 seconds to close the show. But
I'll say it's been a great interview, and I've had an opportunity to express myself, and I'm grateful to you and to you guys for hosting this so that folks can learn more if they're interested.
Outstanding. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've had a very intense interview. How can someone contact you if they'd like to send you a specific question that we didn't address today, or gripe or oppose your view?
They can go to
or show support.
Sure, either way. They can go to our website, votedanbishop.com, and they can sign as a place. They can sign up, get on a list of if they want to receive our communications, or they can communicate to us. They can follow me on social media, both on X, or formerly Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. It's Dan Bishop NC, and they'll find us there.
Outstanding. Well, it's been a pleasure to exchange and hear your commentary on some of the very, very and most important and intense issues here in North Carolina as you seek to serve as our Attorney General here in North Carolina, the top law enforcement officer in the state of North Carolina, ladies and gentlemen. This candidate, Mr. Dan Bishop, is a present congressman. He's also leaving his position, looking at leaving his position as he wants to be elected and entrusted to be our top law enforcement officer. Thank you for joining me. I'm Vernon Garrison, and I've been your host today on Meet the Candidate here at GPAT 23. Thank you very much, and we hope you guys have a great rest of the day.